Welcome back to the infamous project, guys. So today I wanted to do a segment on buying used motors and most importantly buying used mystery motors. So I picked this one up last week and I started going through it a little bit and then I held myself back and I said, you know what, this is a perfect opportunity because it doesn't necessarily apply just to Fox body guys, but any car enthusiast that's looking to replace or upgrade or just purchase a used engine off of someone in general. So we've all seen the Craigslist rebuilds, we've seen the fully built motors being sold for a big loss, or maybe even like the red turbo car that I got that had that spark plug issue in the cylinder head. There's a lot of good deals out there, and a lot of those good deals is just because lack of documentation, and you can't verify or validate necessarily what you're buying. So as you might know, I recently acquired a 1990 GT that's supercharged and has a nice built motor in it. Well, I want to keep that motor for another project that I have and put that car a little bit back more to stock and get everything cleaned up and just have a nice driver. So along came this motor, actually off of a friend of mine who runs the Fox Body Mustangs Peterborough Club. He's like, I got this motor, it's been rebuilt, it's got 289 heads on it and a B cam, this is the price, if you're interested, let me know. So here it is. Now you can see it's not the prettiest motor, not by any means, but it's fairly clean when you start looking at it a little bit more closely. And this is where a potentially good deal can come in. And you might not have a seller that's as lenient as the seller that I got this one off of, but there are some due diligence steps that you can do to make sure that if you're buying a used motor, there's no 100% in anything, but at least you can be pretty confident in your purchase in knowing what you might be putting in your car. So despite all the cosmetic ugliness of this thing, it's clear this thing has been sitting around for a while. It's clear that it's been sitting in a northern climate and probably going through some humidity and temperature changes, which this type of corrosion that you see on the water pump down here, this is very typical for northern cars up here, especially if stuff is near concrete. Just between the temperatures and everything else, corrosion occurs, but all the pulleys spin freely. There is a 3G alternator sitting on here, so that is an instant, I guess, little bonus that you can visually see. There are 289 heads on here. They actually have the 3/4 inch spark plug threads, and you can notice that there's no emissions on the back side of the heads here. So we know these are 289 heads. We don't know if there's a cam in here. We've all heard this a million times of, oh yeah, the motor's got a cam, this, that, and the next thing. Well, unless you're gonna pull this timing cover off, or the water pump and the timing cover and everything else, you're not gonna know what cam is inside a used motor unless you got that full build sheet, which this isn't one of those motors. So you don't know what's underneath the valve covers, you don't know what cam's in it, so we know we got some heads. We know we got a 3G alternator. We can look a little bit more closely. You can see the gaskets have been done. This is a one-piece rubber gasket. That's pretty much it from the outside. So a lot of people might be like, ew, how can I trust that this motor is going to run? Now we're going to get into a few of the steps that I've done and things that you guys can do to make sure that you feel confident when you're buying a used motor. So first things first, and this has actually already happened when I started doing my last video and realized that I should probably go into a little bit more details. You're going to want to do a compression test, guys. If compression doesn't come back very good, then maybe do a leak down, do a dry test. If the dry test isn't good, try a wet test by putting oil down in the cylinder, see if the compression comes back up. So I went ahead and fully compression tested this motor. You can do so, with any compression testing tool. The only thing here is that you do need to bolt your flywheel on, your bell housing, put a starter on the motor to be able to get this done. Sounds a little tedious, but honestly, it's probably the best and most important initial step when you're buying a used motor, because you don't know how it's been maintained, you don't know how it was driven or cared for, any of those things. So went ahead and got that done, and amazingly enough, this motor has about 180 psi on each cylinder. So I think that that's probably due to the 289 heads upping the compression a little bit. And I went ahead and went online and did my research. Are 289 heads of any value on your average 5-liter motor? And back in the day, some people were saying, yeah, no, it's a decent upgrade, but they don't flow that much better than an E7. You need to upgrade your valves, you need to do this to make sure that they can run on unleaded gas, so on and so forth. So at that point I was like, okay, well, are these heads really an upgrade? Who knows? But the most important part, the compression's good. So even if I was just looking for a stock motor, which I am looking for a stockish motor, that's fine. Whether these are going to pump out a little bit more power really doesn't matter at the end of the day for the route that I am going to go. If they were significantly ported or improved, hey, added bonus. So you just have to factor that into how much you're going to be spending on the motor. Is that, what's that lowest price point, or what is the assumption? People say they rebuild things and, oh, it's a 306 now, but you don't know necessarily if that work was done. Assume it's a stock block, assume everything is stock, and then anything else that you find is a bonus. So that was the first step. The next step that we can do is we can actually use a scope. And I have one right here. Don't hate on the snap-on, it works. And then you can actually scope down in the cylinders. So this is going to be a little hard to show you guys real time because, well, I only have two hands, one for the camera to record and one for the camera to show you in the cylinders. So, we can go ahead and put the camera in there and take a peek around. Actually, that's a really good shot. So hopefully you guys can see a little bit of that. But I've already gone through and looked inside all of these cylinders, and everything is super clean inside. So you can look for carbon buildup, you can look for nicks on the top of the pistons, which could indicate that, some metal went through the motor at some point, or some other debris, and everything looked super clean inside the cylinder walls, which is, again, extremely important, and it validates the compression test as well. So that's something else that you can do if you don't have access to a compression testing tool. At least take a look down in the cylinders and make sure that everything is clean and tidy in there. So with those few due diligence steps done, that was enough for me to go ahead and say, okay, I'll take the motor for the price with the assumptions and everything else that I had done, on inspecting inside the cylinders and that compression test. Anything else on top of that is going to be a bonus for me. It's clear that this motor is extremely dirty. It's going to need a lot of elbow grease, or as I like to call them, dishes. So cleanup's going to be required. I'm not overly concerned about the intakes because I actually have a really nice set of Cobra intakes that I've already gone ahead and cleaned up and painted, which I can show you right here. So I got the lower sitting over in the back, but that's going to dress up the top of the motor quite nicely. The oil pan's going to have to probably come off and get cleaned up. The heads are actually, upon closer inspection, they're actually really clean. This gasket, which is sitting on here, actually makes things look a lot worse than they really are. So I've already kind of loosened some things off here to make life a little bit easier. So the next thing is pulling off the upper intake manifold and then pulling off the lower intake manifold, being able to get the valve covers off and see what's inside. You see that I've already had the intakes off because I got everything taped up and clean. So the one important thing before I go ahead and pull this off is that after I pulled that upper off, there was a lot of debris, you know, dust, dirt. I think there was a couple leaves and everything else in here. So, you know, I masked off the top and then took compressed air and blew everything clean in here just to make sure that, you know, when you pull this off, last thing you want is a bunch of dirt and everything going right down into your lifters or down into the heads, into the cylinders, across the valves, everything else. So that's an important little precautionary measure that you guys might want to take. So I'm going to go ahead and lift this lower intake off now. So initially when I took this off, it wasn't so pretty in here. I wanted to take all the precautions that I could. So you can see that I have pieces of shop towel stuffed in all of the ports, just to make sure that when you use compressed air and you're blowing stuff around to try and clean stuff up, that you don't get that down inside the motor. I went ahead and I sprayed WD-40 in there, took my time, you know, toothbrush, you know, and just kind of got that rusty color out of the top here. So the one nice thing, if you guys haven't noticed yet, because it was the second thing I noticed, because the first thing that I noticed was, you know, how ugly it was in here initially, but that these heads have actually been ported out. You know, they've been gasket matched, and whoever did it did a pretty good job. So again, it's kind of going towards that, you know, initial assumption that I was talking about earlier about how nice and clean the heads actually looked, that someone had probably gone over and made sure that all of that top end of the motor was taken care of. So you can see the lifters are super clean, you know, the rods are super clean. Now we can see we got ported heads. It's kind of unfortunate that they just had stock upper and lowers that weren't ported at all. So I think bolting those Cobra intakes on here is actually going to make a nice little upgrade. So now that we've assessed kind of the overall heads, if you actually take down this guy that holds down all the lifters, there's some holes down in the block in here, and these holes allow for the oil to flow through. And if you look really closely, you'll be able to see the cam lobes. And again, what you can do is you can put the scope for as much as you can get it in there, but even just a bright flashlight and inspecting, you know, towards the front and towards the back, you can see the cam lobes and their condition. All right, so now that we've inspected all of those things, now is time we can pop a valve cover off and see what's underneath. And would you look at that? We got a nice set of crane rockers on here. So these are the bonuses that I was talking about. So going back to having that assumption, expect the worst when you are looking at a used motor that doesn't have documentation. You know, it's really important to set your expectations low, make sure that the price is right, and then buy smart, you know, because the guy didn't pull these or any of this stuff apart before he sold it to me. He was just relaying the message that he got when he bought the motor. So, you know, to me, you can say there's a cam, you can say it was rebuilt, you can say all those things, but if you don't have the documentation or the proof to back it up, it all means nothing at the end of the day. So, not to mention the motor looked super dirty, so you got to sort of look beyond those things sometimes and hope for that diamond in the rough. So that's what I truly believe this motor is. I think that it was a pretty good buy at the end of the day. Got rockers, got ported heads, definitely got a rebuild. You know, I'm going to assume that that B cam is in fact in there. You know, be able to definitely hear it when the motor fires for the first time. There you have it, guys. When you're buying that used motor off someone that you don't know, or maybe it's someone that you know but they don't have the full history of it, a little bit of due diligence, a little bit of time, and this is how you can give yourself some reassurance, knowing that you can be pretty confident with the motor that you're going to be using for that project of yours. And you know, you could go a step further. You could pull that oil pan off. You could, you know, check inside and see what the undersides of the pistons, the rods, you know, make sure that there's no spun bearings or anything like that. But at the end of the day, for what this is, you know, these 5-liter motors are pretty bulletproof at the end of the day, and I am happy with this purchase. So I hope that this video has helped you guys in some way, shape, or form. If you have any other tips, tricks, or advice that you want to add to in the comments in terms of your experiences buying motors that can help out other people, by all means, feel free to add them. But there you have it. Happy motor buying.